Thank you very much for that kind introduction and for the generous applause. We hope we're worthy of that applause. And we are also very happy to be here with you this afternoon. It's nice to see that the best of this conference has been saved for last. Why do I say that? Not because it's us sitting here and being on this panel. It's because big data is one of the key reasons why there is something like cybercrime. Data is the new oil of this economy. And 2 weeks ago I said it's the new water, because then the prices of oil were still a bit lower, but they're rising again, so I switched to oil as my benchmark reference. But data is a key asset for our economies, and it is often the crown jewel, the prize money for cybercrime. So we could have started this conference with this topic and talk about big data and how it actually triggers and incentivates hackers and breaches of security, etc., but we've kept it for last. And as was said in the previous expose, there's a whole market out there for data. And there's a dark side of the internet where actually data that have been compromised, data that have been stolen are traded, and where prices are put forward, and where you see that there is a real ecosystem and an economy out there. Now, I'm in excellent company to discuss the challenges and opportunities of big data and the relationship with cybercrime this afternoon. The way we will run this panel is that we will have 3 presentations by our speakers, and then we will have time and let's say reserve time for interaction with you, the audience, because you've been sitting through this conference, you will be listening to the speakers. We want to hear from you what you're still struggling with, or where you see points that maybe have not yet been made. So I will encourage you to step up and ask questions, and if not, I will just, as I was used to being a student sitting there 25 years ago, I will just call upon you and involve you in the debate. So you might as well ask a question. To our panel now, we will actually have the presentations in the order in which my co-panelists are lined up to my left side. So we will kick off with Marc Lambotte. It's very hard to escape from Marc Lambotte because I actually heard him on the 1 o'clock news when I was driving over him. Marc is the CEO of Agoria, which is par excellence the technology platform in Belgium. And Marc was actually testifying to the investment climate of Belgium and the advantages and disadvantages that we have. Today, Marc is here as a leader and a witness from the technology sector on what is happening in the arena of big data. And so we will have first that testimonial by Marc. We will then immediately switch over to our second panelist, and that is Tomas Clemente Sanchez from PwC. The previous panel was actually composed of 2 gentlemen with the family name of Clement. So I see that there is a red line throughout these panels. We now have Tomas Clemente on the panel. And Tomas is actually a senior expert on privacy, IT, and security within PwC. So we actually will hear from him specifically what the intersection between cybercrime and big data brings. How the 2 cross-fertilize each other, and where the tension field and even the build-up, as I may say, is actually triggering the systems today. And then we will have, I would say, a very unique opportunity. We will have a case study on how actually big data is playing a role on the side of law enforcement, where we will have Jan from Europol testify as to how big data is being, on the one hand, used as a tool, but how also at the same time it creates limitations and expectations, especially looking at it through the eyes of a data protection specialist within Europol. So on that note, I think we have a very complete panel. We have an industry leader. We have Tomas, who has actually also a background as a telecoms engineer. And then we have a bit of a hybrid between what I would call a cop and a lawyer, because Jan is also a lawyer. So it almost sounds like the title of a good movie, like The Cook, The Thief, The Wife, and The Lover. But I will not qualify which of the panelists will have what label. I will keep a neutral position there, although I consider myself to be the cook here. On that note, Marc, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Erik. They usually talk about me as the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I won't mention which one I am. So thank you for the introduction. I'm the walking kind, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. So sorry for the man on the camera. You'll have to do your best to follow me. First of all, I have a challenge here because I promised Erik to do this in no more than 20 minutes. So I put my phone here. It will ring after 19 minutes, because if I run over, I owe him a bottle of champagne. So there we go. That's right. Let me show you some pictures, ladies and gentlemen. First picture, the beach. Almost 100 years ago. So please study the picture. I'll show you another picture. The beach. Now, I'll give you another picture. Tennis. Almost, well, let's call it 1930s. Tennis today. What have you seen? A lot more? Color. Yeah. It's, I can say it's a lot more colorful as well. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past century, we have seen a cultural evolution. And the cultural evolution is that we now show more of ourselves. You've seen the physical evidence of that, but it's more than just a physical thing. I'm sorry, I was actually focusing on the male tennis player, but couldn't find a good picture for that. So I'm sorry. I'll come back to your reaction if I may, okay? We are showing a lot more of ourselves, not just physically, but we are willing to share where we are at a given point in time through apps like Foursquare. We men, we are willing to now show our emotions. It's okay for a man to cry. For those who didn't realize that yet, it really is okay to cry. So that is really a dramatic change in culture. Here is an example of it. Right. This comes from the internet. I apologize for the language, it isn't mine. But here we have a guy, Robbie, who writes, "At the hospital and my grandpa is still sick and I have to watch him fucking a man tonight is gonna suck." This is a real thing, right? Now, there's a friendly person who adds, "Hey Robbie, I think a comma would help here." And Robbie answers, "That's fucked up, man. My grandpa already sick and the last thing he needs is to be put in a comma. Fuck you, man." Okay. Now, Robbie has shared something with us inadvertently. He has shared with us this, I call this an unintentional display of lack of intelligence. But there's a key message here. Sometimes we share things that we didn't actually want to share. This was an inadvertent sharing of information. So, let me get to the real stuff. Big data, a lot of data. Whenever we talk about data, from a business point of view, I see three phases. The first one is detecting the business opportunity. The second one is then capturing the data, and the third one is using them. And let me share with you what I'm talking about. I imagine I had a bunch of data. What could I do with it? Could I put it to use to society? Could I make money out of it? But there's one starting condition in order to do something. I must realize the data exists. And if you say, "Marc, yeah, right, of course, but, well, let's look at this room. Who detected the pressure-sensitive scanner as you entered the room that took a picture of the soles of your shoes? Who noticed? You did. That's bad news, because there isn't any. I didn't notice it. Your shoes. Look at the wear of these shoes. If I took a picture of the underside, I could derive quite a bit of medical data from this. I could start detecting whether you have a spinal problem. I could draw conclusions about the elevation of your hips, etc. The data is here. Nobody is doing something with it, but the data as such is here. How many things have you touched since you entered this room? You have been spreading around very sensitive personal information, your fingerprints. Most of you are still breathing. If I look around the room, I can't guarantee it for all of you. A few might be sleeping or just dead. I don't know yet. But most of you are breathing. I could film you. I could count the number of times you breathe per minute. We could actually, there are sensors that would allow us to have an estimation of the volume you breathe over that period. I could again capture medical data from you, and it's here in the room. I'm not, by the way. Body language. I can make statements over here, film you, check your reactions, and with a relatively high degree of certainty, if you were all Belgian, I could correlate that to the political party you vote for in function of the things I say. Your body language is an expression of data, a lot of data. Now, companies create lots of products. One of them are sensors. In a house, we can these days find tens of different types of sensors in order to capture the data. There's a whole business. You can buy it in all kinds of warehouses, and there are very specialized sensors as well. This is a Samsung, I could call it a smartwatch, they also call it a health watch. Look at all the things in there. There are all sensors that capture medical information. Why are the lights on the inside of the little band? It's because we now use photonics to measure certain bodily functions. I can capture just about anything. But then the question becomes, what do I use it for? In my house, to save lives, I want to detect the fire. I want to increase safety. If my old mother falls from her bed, I want it to be detected and I want to be called. All kinds of positive things. I can use the data from my wristwatch to show my heart rate, etc., etc., etc. And yes, it can improve my quality of life, it can be necessary, or it can just be a gadget. I can use all that. Now, there's a whole business. This is a Garmin watch. Who does some running in the morning? I do some running in the morning. And all the data is stored on my watch, and then I download it to my computer, and then what happens? It's sent up to the cloud. And that's, ladies and gentlemen, is where I start having questions. It's good for Garmin. It's good for the data transportation services, the Proximuses, the Mobistars of this world. It's good for the application developers. It's good for the gadget manufacturers. There's a whole industry that is worth billions now that has to do with capturing and using data. I love that. I represent the technology industry, so thank you for the business opportunity. But, oh yeah, that's all these people. They're all happy. Looks like everybody is winning, but there's a dark side, as Erik said. And the dark side represents a business opportunity for many other companies. What are you willing to share? Now, imagine you're a company and you want to develop a product. And you see this picture. Yes, there are cultural differences. You know, if you're a transnational company, you want to find the balance between global efficiency, between local responsiveness and worldwide learning. Here, one geographical location, and we have two women that have a totally different view on what they want to share. We in this room, international audience, we will have different opinions about what information we are willing to share. Now, how will I then create a product that I can sell on the market? Let me put it bluntly to you. There may be quite a few technical people in the room. If I let most security people do, they will find technical solutions to find a good protection against cybercrime. But quite frankly, as a user, I typically hate the people who want to take care of my security, because they make my user interface with the systems I use less friendly. They drive costs up for me, which may be less of a problem for large companies, but for a small and medium enterprise, the cost can be prohibitive. So yes, what are you willing to share? Is there anybody from Accenture in the room? No, okay. This is a pay slip. This is a pay slip. Where did I find it? I found it on the internet, so you can't read this from the back. But I can tell you that Rohit Sharma, on the 15th of January 2013, had a salary of about 28,000 rupees. Belgians typically don't, if there's one thing you don't share with anybody, it's how much or little you earn, okay? You don't do that. That's the last taboo. I found it on the internet. I don't know whether it's a real thing or not, but anyway, some people are willing to share a lot more. My data, my running data, no doubt is visible to Garmin. They can sell it to insurance companies if they want to. They can sell it to anybody that is willing to pay the money for it. I don't know if they do. I don't know. I have no idea. Who has seen the series Person of Interest? You have seen Person of... It's great, isn't it? Eh? It's wonderful. For those of you who don't know the series, this is about a guy that has developed a machine, and the machine is fed by all kinds of data. Street cameras, telephone taps, everything. And the machine's purpose is to early detect acts of terrorism. Anybody doing anything wrong. How far away are we from this? I can use data to detect people who may have planted a bomb on a train. There is software that simply detects strange behavior. It exists. Look at what happens on the border, Mexico, US. All kinds of funny systems exist. Person of interest may be less far away than we think. Is that bad? When I entered the room here, there were 2 police people. There were no paratroopers yet, that's for next year, to protect us. That's fine with me, I have no problem with that. Can the government tap my phone? I don't care. I have nothing to hide, or at least not to them. Okay? So person of interest, we're very close. Huge business opportunity. Track and trace is an enormous booming business where you track and trace vehicles. All kinds of solutions exist. Privacy issues, right? Or not? I see you nodding yes. For you, it's a privacy issue. For me, not at all. I couldn't give a toss if my boss knows where I am. It's fine with me, and I respect that it's not fine for you. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a cultural debate more than anything else. What's the problem with this picture? Not for us, nothing for us. We see a house and there's a car parked in front of it. Imagine you're the neighbor, and you have noticed that this car, belonging to a lady, always is parked on the driveway when the lady of the house is not in, but the husband is. Are you with me? context. For us, there's nothing wrong. The neighbor, she may be spreading some gossip. Is this big data? I bet you it is. Once you feed all that information, like in the machine of person of interest, it's all data points, enormous data points. Our behavior, ladies and gentlemen, is one like this. Very often we simply don't want to know. We don't want to know. We jump. We assume that the data that we have is somewhere safe. The whole industry about capturing data and using data is built on this foundation. If tomorrow we are no longer prepared to jump, to have that leap of faith, that whatever data we willingly or unwillingly, like your body language, share with one another, if we are no longer prepared to do that, and if we want to block it all, then that industry will collapse immediately. So, this debate, and we'll talk about it later, is to me not a technical debate. It's a societal debate. Nuclear applications. You can do what you see on the left, or you can use it to treat cancer. It's a good thing we are involved with nuclear energy and its applications, particularly if you have cancer. Should we ban all nuclear applications? I would put it to you that would be a silly thing to do. Do we need to restrict big data because it may be abused? That, ladies and gentlemen, all depends on the definition of cybercrime. What one person considers to be a crime is totally acceptable to another person. And that's why it's a cultural and societal debate that we, from the industry, are confronted with. We cannot develop worldwide products. We have to focus extremely on the local responsiveness component in transnational companies. And now I know, because my alarm clock hasn't gone off, my alarm clock has not gone off, and the wonderful thing is I don't owe you a bottle of champagne yet, Erik. Now I can talk for 3 more minutes and then I've had it, but I won't. So I want to thank you for having listened to my introduction. I'm sure we will have some interesting debates afterwards. And then it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker to you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Right. First of all, I apologize for the overloading of Clementes this evening. It never happened to me before. And I'm here just to show you, to share with you some of the insights of PwC when it comes to the application of big data techniques in the context of cybersecurity. I am pretty sure that I will not be able to go in the short amount of time that we have in detail to all the aspects that are involved, not at least the detail that I would love to, but I hope to at least to share enough information to you to have a meaningful conversation later. First of all, the cybersecurity world today, well, it's the traditional cat and mouse game. We have a cybersecurity professional that are trying to catch up, the cybercrime professional as well. Cybercrime professionals that are supported by a cybercrime industry that provides them the tools, the means, and the information that they require to perform their criminal activities. We have seen plenty of examples in the previous discussions and panels. And this cybercrime industry, it's every day getting broader in their scope. We have seen it as well today. Everything can be hacked. Everything can be used for criminal activities. It's getting faster in their methods. To give an example, the average lifetime of the IP address of a malware distribution server in the internet is around 16 hours. So we have 16 hours to locate, identify, and neutralize a malware distribution system. The moment that we want to, if we don't do it in 16 hours, it's probably not there anymore. Once that the malware is distributed, then it stays there for weeks, months, years even. But we cannot trace back probably who did it. And they are getting smarter. They are developing a lot of strategies to actually bypass all the tools, processes, and technologies that we are using to detect them. We have seen as well lots of other examples today. I will not repeat what has been said before, but just a small example is that, for example, malware today, the malware attacks vectors have changed in a way that signature-based detection is no longer as effective as it should be. When you have a piece of malware, you can characterize it with a signature. That signature can be detected. Today, malware is distributed across several files, several pieces, so the signature does not fit anymore. And they are doing this dynamically. The moment that there's a new virus definition that comes, or malware definition that comes into the market, they know if their malware is going to be detected or not, so they readapt themselves to pass unnoticed again. So in this world, let's say it's a cat and mouse game. Sometimes I'm not completely sure on who's the cat and who's the mouse. And in this context, this quite difficult context, the big data analysis for cybercrime detection, it's something that actually allows us to leverage a little bit the scales. We can process more data, we can process in a very efficient way as long as we know what we are looking for, and we can keep up with the bad guys. And what are, let's say, the typical uses that we see of using big data in cybersecurity? Of course, any technique that we can use, it can be used both for attacks and for defenses. And the first one that comes into mind is threat intelligence. This is nothing more, nothing less than being able to identify if something is threatening our organization, is threatening our infrastructure. Nothing more, because on the practical, on the theory, it seems pretty simple. On the practical, it's quite difficult to identify what is threatening us. We don't even see it coming sometimes. So the threat intelligence is definitely a way to consolidate all kinds of structured data coming from all kinds of sources, whether it be technical, whether it be situational, whether it be contextual information, to find threats for us. Of course, it can be used also for attackers with a similar technique, but with a completely different purpose. They want to find weak targets. In the mode of attacks, we see as well a lot of social engineering. As Marc mentioned it before, well, we can have sensors all around us that detect patterns in our behavior. If that behavior can be exploited by somebody to win money with it, they will surely do it. And if it's a illegitimate, of course, purpose, then we have a crime. Suppose, for example, that, well, we've seen that in a lot of cases, we are able to detect if people are home or not. If they are at home, then we will not go into the house. If they aren't, then we will probably be tempted to do so. And this doesn't work anymore. No, no, no. Okay. No, neither. Okay. I did it. I blocked it. All right, now it's gone. Of course, the capabilities of data processing and consolidating of that data is what allows also the cybercrime industry to perform enhanced attacks. As I said before, they are interested in doing fast attacks, pass unnoticed, and they are using as well big data to detect our attempts to neutralize them. At the moment that we try to neutralize them, then they adapt themselves and they launch their attack again. We saw it previously in the panel, in the previous panel discussion. They will come back definitely, but they want to be sure that they are going to come back. They are using big data techniques to actually ensure that they can retreat at the right moment and come back when you don't expect it. But well, it's not that as dark as it seems. We have also defenses. The defenses in general, what big data allow us to do is to build aggregated layers of defense, where we start at the lower level with the sensor analysis. Sensor analysis is nothing more, nothing less, again, that the capture of events through certain sensor points, when we have installed sensors, certain events that might lead to security events. Thanks to big data, we can definitely treat more sensors more quickly, more effectively, and even gather much more information about how those attacks are being launched. The next step of aggregation, it's the behavioral analysis. Sometimes, as I said before, sensor analysis is not enough. We have to correlate those sensor analysis to find patterns. But sometimes we can detect that a certain security event, for example, a piece of malware, has a certain behavior. If we observe the same behavior, even if we don't have detected any malware inside our organization, the conclusion is pretty obvious. We have malware inside. It's simply that we didn't know it. And this is when the behavioral analysis comes into play. We can use the same data from sensor analysis to actually create patterns of behavior. And that is precisely the technique that allows us to identify new malware pieces in a very quick and dynamic way. At the end, we have the social network analysis. Of course, this is probably the highest level of aggregation when the human behavior comes into effect. At the end, the cybercrime industry is people that are going to use digital infrastructure to actually perform their crimes, or to support them in their crimes. Well, if we are able to anticipate that they are intending to commit a crime just simply because they are announcing it with a loud voice, then we can already prepare our defense strategies, prepare our behavioral patterns, prepare our sensors to actually try to counter them. The most obvious example that I can think of is, for example, Anonymous. Anonymous, each time that they are going to perform an attack, they put it in Twitter, they put it in Facebook, and they announce it to the high winds. But that's a pretty obvious, let's say, announcement. Sometimes it's not that obvious. Some example of a real case application of where is this being done. The CAIDA example, for example, the Cooperative Associations for Internet Data Analysis has been placing, it's a public sponsor initiative when they have been putting sensor monitors in the internet traffic since 1998, and they have been collecting and analyzing the data and trying to find traffic patterns that can lead to attacks. This was a very helpful tool when we had the silkworm attacks, so for example, the silkworm malware. And when we are talking about sensor, we are not talking about extremely high technology. That is a sensor over there. Let's see if this works. This sensor is simply a Raspberry Pi. Total cost 40 euros plus maybe €1 per month due to energy consumption. It's negligible. And this is actually what allows, this kind of tool allows us to get a lot of intelligent data of the traffic on the internet. There are also private sponsored initiatives. This, for example, is from Deutsche Telekom. Deutsche Telekom has planted in his network a network of around 180, 90, I think now, sensors. And they actually publish all the behavior of traffic internet data through the network. And this is absolutely publicly available and for absolutely everybody. For us, the good guys, and the others. But there are these initiatives, in a lot of cases, they are preventive strategies. We want to be sure that we are going to see an attack coming. In other cases, we can use also big data analysis to actually perform, let's say, the cleanup work. And I'm not talking about forensic analysis. When I'm talking, for example, it's a case of a client of us, major company, more than 50,000 employees, distributed around more than 800 sites, all of them with an IT infrastructure, counting some 10 major data centers, dozens of minor data centers, and all of them distributed around 56 countries, if I recall correctly. And they have a big issue. Their IT environment, well, they had blind spots. They didn't know completely what was going on. It's a very complex environment. We don't know and we don't control exactly what is going on in all of these 800 sites. And we might have blind spots that we don't know anything about. So what we did in this case is to actually gather data from sensors that they had already in place and perform a big data analysis. This is the result of it. It looks quite colorful. Looks quite sexy, but actually there's a lot of information in there, not confidential information. Everything is anonymized, of course. But what we have in here is actually the representation of more than 80 million of unique connections point to point between around more than 10 million IP addresses that we identified in this vast environment. I don't know you, but I don't know of any IT responsible in the world which is able to identify all of that. There might be some, but I don't know them. So obviously, this kind of data, it can be also only worked with in big data analysis. I will not go too much into the detail of what it means, every ball of it, because well, we have a limited amount of time. But suffice to say that we identify with this the full activity, network traffic and data transfer activities of this organization. And what we did later is actually to compare that with what was supposed to be the established business practices, the established IT operational processes, and everything that could not be considered as a potential unusual behavior. And we characterize that as patterns. When cross-check the patterns that we characterize with this data, then we did find all the blind spots that they were looking for. And not only the blind spots that they were looking for, we also did find the weak spots. Some of these data transfers were considered to be highly confidential, and they didn't have the appropriate security safeguards in there. We will able to see that once that we compared with the patterns. And at the end, well, this kind of analysis helped the organization basically to have a much better control of all the risks and threats that they will be facing. This is, as I said, it's a use of big data that is not exactly proactive against incident, it's not exactly reactive against incident, but it helps protect your organization, it helps you doing the right thing. Some privacy considerations. Every time that we discuss about big data and the matter of, it is intrusive, it is a violation of my right as a person to actually gather this data, but it always comes into play. We all have this feeling of, ooh, Big Brother is there. And in that sense, I completely agree with Marc when he said that it depends completely on the users. The same data that you can use for absolutely beneficial purposes for our society, it can be used as well for malicious purposes. And it's very difficult to make the difference at the beginning when you are collecting the data. So, in a nutshell, should we use big data? Yes, of course, but not to do whatever we want, not to do uses that are absolutely illegitimate. And I want to share with you a couple of thoughts on the 2 points that actually they are the key points of big data: the data collection and the data processing. What are we collecting and what are we using it for? When you look at the world that we are living today, we are already living for a long time in the Internet of Things. We have smart cards, smart laptops, phablets, tablets, watches. We have machines, coffee machines that are connected to the Internet. We have one on PwC, I can tell you. And so in that sense, all of these data sensors, all of these things that are connected to the Internet around us, they are collecting data on us, directly or indirectly. I remember on a study that I read from Berkeley, I think, I'm not sure, that it was enough to have 7 sensor data collections around a person to actually identify it uniquely. And the most recent study said that with only 4 payments through credit card, you can find out, identify uniquely a single individual. So if you look at the amount of sensors that are around us every day, well, we are there. Data is being collected whether we like it or not. So are we still in measure to actually control that? It's a question just for everybody just to think about. The second point is about the data processing. The data processing actually is the key point of the big data. What are we using that data for? And the principle, well, it's very simple. We want to use it for good. We don't want to use it for bad. But who decides what's good and what's bad? We don't have yet a clear agreement, a societal agreement, let's call it, about what is good and what is bad, because when it comes to our personal sphere, we don't have the exact values to define our personal sphere. When it comes to data collection, we have completely the right to say, that is none of your business. That's our right as individuals to neglect, to say no to a data collection that we don't want. But that barrier is going to be completely different in my case than in yours, So we need a little bit more of agreement at a societal level to see what are the uses that we want to allow. And of course, once we have these uses, then we need somebody to look over them. We need somebody to ensure that those uses are respected and we don't step out of the line. Because once that you have the data and you can do something with it, well, it's very easy to fall and to do something that you are not supposed to. I've seen that a lot of cases. And to be honest, I will not trust on ethics value only to be sure that we are kept in the right line. So we need an active watchdog, and we need active watchdogs with teeth, actually, that can take action. So finally, the key factor of all this complex environment is always to find the right way to balance all the legitimate rights of parties involved. We are government, law enforcement, security professional, businesses, individuals as we are. Well, there is always a way to find that balance, and we need somehow to find it if we want to progress, and always for the common good. So thank you very much, and well, I will leave you with next speaker, Jan Ellermann.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much, Tomas, and thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure. As a matter of fact, I'm not used to being introduced in such nice terms as happened here, so I broke my head a little bit about the question, how should I introduce myself to you? And then I thought, well, the easiest way is to start from scratch. So on the left-hand side, you see me with my very first friend. In the middle, that's my very first real best friend. And then on the right-hand side, me and best friend on the same party, as you can see. And the upper picture is me and my wife. So if you're looking now for the link to data protection or big data, I might bother you with something like better don't post that kind of stuff online. Or another angle to go about it would be maybe consider carefully whether you open your presentation like this if you want to be taken seriously afterwards. But for me, it would be too late. So as a matter of fact, it's just a cheap trick to secure your attention as I'm the last presenter here. So essentially, I've been introduced as a hybrid cop, which I like very much. I'm a lawyer, in fact. This really doesn't work anymore. No, it does. I'm a lawyer from Germany. I've worked on Europol business since back in 2001, in fact, when I was drafting a thesis comparing Europol with the FBI, because at that time, at least in Germany, it was very popular to call for Europol to develop into a European FBI. And I thought if everyone is talking about that, maybe it makes sense to drill into that from a research perspective. And the outcome of that, in a nutshell, was that there's certainly a lot we can learn from the FBI till this day. But on the other hand, if you look into the history of the FBI, there are also very dark chapters. So in particular, as many of you might know, connected to Director J. Edgar Hoover, who was in charge of the FBI from the late 20s till his death in the early 70s. And the reason why he stayed in charge was whenever somebody came too close to him or threatened his power, he would let him know, like Kennedy, for instance, you know, JFK, I've come across a number of things there. They are safe with me, so don't worry about it. But in between the lights, he said, don't touch my chair. So these are the kind of things we definitely would not like to see at Europol. I've been a lawyer in a small law firm for a while, then switched to become a public prosecutor, also for a short term. I think that helps me till this day because it gave me a little bit of that hunting spirit, which I believe policemen have to have, which probably provides me with a very particular perspective when it comes to data protection questions. So nowadays, I'm working as one of two so-called senior specialists in Europol's data protection office. And our task is to ensure that what our people are doing is in line with the applicable legal framework. So in that function, I'm also giving advice, best practice, and guidance to EC3, so to the European Cybercrime Center on all data protection matters. Big data or not, when I was invited for that talk, I did a little bit of research on big data because I was not sure, are we doing big data processing at Europol at all or not? And what I saw is that everybody's talking about big data, but nobody really has a clear definition on what it is. So at Europol, I would argue if you look at these figures here, well, it's big data, maybe it's little big data, but in the end, just to give you a rough overview of our systems, we have the Europol information system. You can see yourself roughly 75,000 persons processed in that system. That's not equivalent to data items, as you can see yourself. So a data item might also be a telephone number or a license plate or anything the like. From a data protection perspective, it's important to understand that within the EIS, the information system, we may only process suspects, convicted persons, and what we usually refer to as potential future criminals. That may sound a little bit minority report to you, potential future criminals, but you will be relieved to hear that we have no crystal balls at Europol. What this is about is individuals for whom there are reasonable grounds for believing or factual indications they will commit a criminal offense within Europol's mandate. So that's quite common across the EU member state jurisdiction. In Germany, these guys are known as Gefährder. In the UK, it's person of interest, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, so that exists also at national level. The most exciting tool, I would argue, we have at Europol are the AWS analysis work files. And we currently have two of these files. We have two databases. One is focused on serious and organized crime, AWS SOC, and the other one is focused on counterterrorism, AWS CT. And if you look at the figures here, you will see that the large majority of individuals is processed at Europol in a serious and organized crime context, so more than 740,000 currently, and 80,000 persons in a CT context, roughly speaking. The difference between the EIS and the AWFs is that we certainly also in the AWFs may process personal data related to suspects, convicted persons, and potential future criminals. But on top of that, we may process whatever we need for full-fledged crime analysis, meaning could be contacts and associates, could be victims, could be informants, could be witnesses. Whatever we need to do that, we may have that, legally speaking, and that's maybe a little bit simplified. We will talk about that in more detail later on. Within these two databases, we currently have 30 specialized analysis projects, and I will tell you more about this as well. We apply all kinds of modern analytical techniques, such as social network analysis, which has been discussed here on a couple of presentations. And the last thing I would like to introduce is Sienna. That is our information exchange tool, a secure means to get the information from A to B. So, for those of you who wonder what Spider-Man is doing on the screen right now, that has to do something with the most important quote by Spider-Man. So, any Spider-Man fans in the room? Yes. I like that one. Okay. It occasionally happens that people know. So, as you know, probably, it was not Spider-Man, but it was Uncle Ben. So, that's Spider-Man's best advisor. And Uncle Ben, again, stole from Rousseau. So, that is a quite old quote. But it's a very important one to my mind, and that is something we always have to keep in mind at Europol. So we are not just processing any kind of information, we are processing personal data. It's not just any kind of personal data, it tends to be rather sensitive personal data, and that comes with huge responsibilities. Whether you call that big data or not, quite frankly, I couldn't care less. We need to be aware of inherent responsibility and take this very seriously. So what do we do about it? All of you know the gentleman on the screen right now. If you run around at Europol asking people, you will get all the kinds of opinions you also know about. So some say, well, he's a criminal. He has leaked classified information, which technically speaking is absolutely true. Some may even say he's a traitor. Others may say other things. Personally, when I came across all of that, I had two observations. So the first was, if I had a beautiful girlfriend living on Hawaii with a 6-digit income, I would never have done that. And this is not to say that I have an ugly wife or something. Maybe I forgot to mention, so my wife was carrying a mask on the first image. So, but the other thought I had about it was, well, he did a good job. Why? Because he helped me in my duties. He triggered the debate on a healthy balance between security and privacy, which is now more important than ever. And while in the old days it may have happened occasionally that when I was praying data protection to the organization, one or the other might have argued, yeah, Jan, you have to do that. You're working for the data protection office, for the DPO, that's your job. But what should ever happen? Nowadays, these days are over. Because the last person in the organization has understood very well that if we screw it up in terms of data protection, we can close our shop. So I dare to argue, if we would have 50% of what was discussed here in this context, or 25%, or maybe even 10% of that, would be enough to close an organization like Europol, the European Law Enforcement Agency, down. And maybe rightfully so, because there are expectations how we handle your data. On the other hand, I think it's also worthwhile to reflect a little on the difference between what was discussed in the Snowden context and what we are doing, because law enforcement and security service business, these are two different things. When it comes to the way that is regulated by law, we have a far more detailed legal framework to adhere to, and the same applies to supervision. While security services in many member states at least are supervised by special committees in parliament, at Europol, we have multiple layers of supervision, which I can elaborate in more detail if you want. Then we read a lot in the Snowden context about the full take, so taking a full copy of the internet because you never know. At Europol, there's no such thing as a full take. So any information we are receiving is linked to ongoing criminal investigations in member states. So if you want to use that picture, there's no haystack at Europol. There's a pretty big pile of needles, if you want, and it's still difficult enough then to pull the right needle out. But last but not least, I'm working for law enforcement, so it's also necessary to highlight sometimes the fact in these times of heated discussions that it's not only security services exploiting the internet. There are a lot of very bad guys out there, and I think it's our task to get hold of them. What else do we do about data protection in law enforcement? It's a lot about awareness raising. So for those of you who wonder what the beautiful lady on the right-hand side is doing, her name is Robin Sage. Has anyone in the room? In this room, there might be people who are familiar with Robin Sage. Hands up, anyone? Okay, up there, there's a gentleman. Maybe you walked into the trap, maybe not. So Robin Sage was not really Robin Sage, but we were meant to believe that Robin Sage is a 25-year-old former US intelligence member of the US intelligence community with 10 years of experience. She has quit service, but she's still interested in the business and to keep in touch with people. She doesn't exclude to be rejoining, and in the meantime, she likes to stay in touch, and whoever wants to party with her is more than welcome. So what Robin Sage was about was a social engineering experiment by a friend of mine and security researcher Tom Ryan from the US. We invited him over to Europol in order to report on that kind of social engineering experiment, where he created the fake account of Robin Sage and posted it on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and so on and so forth. And from the 17 plus US intelligence agencies which are out there, apart from the big three being FBI, CIA, and NSA, all stepped into that trap. From each and every US intelligence community, there was at least one which liaised with Robin Sage for whatever reason. And then you may wonder, I mean, it was not such a sophisticated hoax. If you carefully listen to what I've told you, she was 25 years old with 10 years of experience. That makes her 15 when joining US intelligence. That is pretty awkward. So you could have spotted that. Nevertheless, she got offers, job offers, including from Google, and very clear text messages from head of HR along the lines of, Robin, if you ever need a job, just ring my number, this kind of stuff. The other experiment which we did was also on the occasion of Data Protection Day. We had a huge event in Europol's auditorium, which is roughly as big as this one here. And then if you have a session on data protection, you're always, as a DPO, you're a little bit worried whether the room will fill or not, because some believe data protection is boring for a reason which I completely don't understand. So, but we had to make sure that everyone is coming. So what did we do? We had a kind of sting operation. So we sneaked into the secure zone of Europol, which is quite heavily secured, with flyers such as this one, and we went to all the toilets and just put them on the wall without talking about it any further. And then we waited what would happen, and we had a unit meeting. And then after a while, my boss' telephone started ringing non-stop. He didn't pick up. We only wanted to reveal around lunchtime. Then my phone started ringing non-stop, but we thought, okay, let's conclude the unit meeting, and then we revealed it about around lunchtime. Then I checked my Facebook, and there was a picture of that flyer with a comment of a colleague of mine and friend, they are here, Europol headquarters. And that was the moment when I said, okay, we should better finish that unit meeting right now. So I called that friend of mine and I said, Doris, could you, Jan speaking, how are you? And she said, well, so far I'm fine. And I said, Doris, it's okay, but just do me one favor, quickly remove that picture from Facebook, because I wanted to create awareness internally, but what I didn't want is an invitation to Anonymous to try hacking Europol, because we are making fun with them. The other thing was, I think the most important decision I had taken as regards that sting operation was to ask permission of the director up front. Maybe otherwise I wouldn't be standing here anymore, because on my way up into the office, I met some. The rumor was already spreading that the DPO was behind that, and some whispered to me, you know that they want to kill you at security, don't you? So security had already called in the KLPD, so the Dutch police, in order to take fingerprints from the flyers. there was a task force established. So after all, I'm very proud because everybody reacted absolutely well. So it was a big success, and in the afternoon we had a full room. But I don't know how often we can do these kind of things. So. Okay, that slide you have to allow me. Europol, the European FBI, I've told you about my thesis. Should you ever come across a situation where you meet somebody who pulls a weird badge and says, Europol, you're arrested, that is the best moment to call in the real police. Because as all of you know, Europol has no executive powers whatsoever. In any rumor, of course, there's an element of truth. So I'm aware of one Europol special agent, Agent Callahan, also known as Catherine Zeta-Jones in Ocean's 12. So for those of you who are very much into movies, my favorite scene in this movie is when she comes to the crime scene in Amsterdam. Local investigators are already on the spot, and she says something like, Agent Callahan, Europol, from here on we take over the investigation. So I've watched that a couple of times. I have no clue who advised these guys. So they were at Europol. The only person, and I happened to be an intern at that time, so everybody was terribly excited and dressing up because everybody thought, okay, it's probably going to be meeting with Catherine Zeta-Jones. Guys, the ladies were also excited because there were rumors also Brad Pitt would be coming, which unfortunately didn't happen. But the only guy I know who really met her was the director, so that's Jürgen Storbeck, whom you see on the right-hand side of this picture, obviously on his happiest day in his professional career here. But why I'm mentioning all of that, apart from the fact that it's nice to have celebrities in your presentation, there is a link to data protection, to my mind. And the link is, we rely on cooperation with national law enforcement. So we cannot conduct our own investigations. Cyber might be, to a certain degree, an exception. But that means if we screw it up in data protection, then nobody wants to play with us anymore. Nobody wants to share their sensitive data with us. We will be out of the game. So that is, to my mind, the link to data protection. We cannot conduct our own investigations. I'm coming to the end, still within the time frame, hopefully. I just want to give you a rough idea of how the AWF environment, the analysis workflow environment looks nowadays and how it looked a couple of days ago, because that also has something to do with the big data logic in a way. A few years ago, this is how it looked. So we had 23 databases, and each of these databases was focusing on a very particular crime commodities, such as, imagine one on drugs, another one on trafficking in human beings, another one on sexual exploitation of children, and so on and so forth. But the analysts could only see into that database. So they had a kind of tunnel view, or we had a silo approach, if you want. And that didn't work very well. And why it didn't work very well is because organized crime has developed into another direction. And there's a parallel, or I see a parallel to private business. So while 20 years ago, maybe commercial business looked like this. So you had the butcher where you got your meat. You had the bakerman where you got your nice bread, and the candy shop where you got your sweets. Nowadays, for many of us, commercial reality looks like this, right? So a big mall, everything is connected, everything is interlinked. So as an analyst now, you would wonder why goose are flying in this mall. That we would need to dig into that. But the bottom line here is, for Europol, while it's not only Rick with the, it sounds for me with the ears, while 2 or 3 years ago, it still looks like 23 distinct databases where we then could maybe manually see this lady here does know this guy here, but on database level, we couldn't draw the link. And that meant we could very well draft a report on that issue, but then the report was maybe forgotten after a time. The analyst had left. We get the next investigation. We don't see that anymore. That couldn't be. So nowadays, we have a scenario or a setup more like this. We still have distinct analysis projects, and that is very important from a data protection perspective, with a view to purpose limitation. If I still have time, I can explain that in more detail. But from an operational perspective, it's very important that nowadays we can draw these links. So in fact, it looks like this. As I told you, 2 big databases. One is AWF SOC on serious and organized crime. The other one, AWF CT on counterterrorism. And within that, you have various analysis projects which are authorized to process certain personal data. So not for all the projects you need victim data. So a number of these projects here say, for my purpose, I don't need victims. That results in an opening order where, for this analysis project, victim data is not allowed because it's not necessary. That is called purpose limitation. Also, when it comes to the categories of data you may process, it depends on the purpose for which you allow them in. So from top of my head, there's only one analysis project at Europol which may process sensitive personal data related to sex life. And that is focal point twins within AWF Serious and Organized Crime. Twins deals with sexual exploitation of children. So of course, obviously, we need sex life data in order to prevent and combat sexual exploitation of children. But that's about it. For any other analysis project, we would reject that. So in practical terms, here I show you focal point monitor deals with outlaw motorcycle gangs, Hells Angels, Bandidos, and so on and so forth. So imagine a situation where we have an overly excited police officer who reports to Europol the new president of Hells Angels Charter Amsterdam is gay and loves wearing women's dress, even though in his community he pretends to be such a tough guy. If that would pop, and that's pure fiction here, huh? I'm making up that case, just to make that very clear. So if that would come up at Europol, at our operational center, they would look at that, they would consult the opening order, and they would see that sex life data is not allowed in a focal point monitor context. So they would reject that data, and they would ask the investigator to resubmit, but without the juicy bit on the woman's clothes. In that sense, you may argue, even a Hells Angel has a right to privacy. We couldn't, I mean, effectively, it's a nonsense example. Of course, we couldn't care less. But there are other things which may be more borderline, so it's for illustration purposes. The other thing you may be interested in is that whatever you do on our database, every action is fully traceable. Also, that is about data protection. So in that, with that, I have given you the overview which I wanted to give you. It takes me within roughly the 20 minutes to the end. So to conclude, what I wanted to convey here is we know about our huge data protection responsibilities in processing very sensitive personal data. It's all about trying to strike the right balance. But then on the other hand, there can also be no doubt that these days there are a number of topics which are really challenging. So that is topics such as data retention. You might have heard it a number of times. These are ongoing discussions on passenger name records and so on and so forth. So what we are trying to achieve is to secure trust of citizens, that what we are doing at Europol is what we should be doing. But I think we also need a discussion on where to draw the right line. And for this kind of discussion, we have created a new network. So it's a secured website. It's an invitation-only network. But for this audience here, so if you're interested, shoot me a message and let me know. Explain your interest, why you would love to join. What I would like to see on this platform is basically any kind of individuals which have expertise or enhanced interest in data protection matters in the specific law enforcement context. And I think many of you qualify for that. It's not meant as data protection experts in the legal sense, but a lot of the discussions we've had here throughout this Congress were very useful for me. And if you have an interest to share your expertise, you're more than welcome to shoot me an email. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jan, for that thrilling presentation. I'm sure the popularity rate of Europol has gone up by about 100% due to your presentation. Wonderful. Mindful of time, I want to first quickly scan the audience to see if there's any immediate pressing questions, because then I will yield to the audience to ask a question first in order not to forgo the opportunity. Are there questions for any of our speakers at this time? No, then I will just kick off with a question, because I was very intrigued by a couple of things that have been said at this panel. And first of all, I think I need to be a little bit harsh on Marc, because Marc said, I don't give a toss about what my boss knows about me. I'm not sure if Marc has a boss, since he's the CEO of his company, unless he is referring to the other part of his matrimonial book, which I'm not going to interfere with. But in all seriousness, I do think that companies are very tempted by the whole big data challenge, the opportunities. There is a commercial dimension, there is money to be made. But at the same time, I do have the feeling that they're enormously struggling with the security concerns that brings about. And I was simply wondering, Marc, you rightly pointed also at the difference between big companies and small and medium-sized enterprises. What can be done more and better there? Because I do think that the more they involve themselves in big data projects, the more they actually maybe even pretend that their data or the data of the persons are in good hands with them, I think the more of responsibility they have in terms of security. So where's the balance? Because I don't think we can simply say there is no problem.
Well, first of all, I do have a boss. It's the chairman of the board. So CEOs have bosses, so that's one thing. As to your question, it's very relevant, Erik. What is the balance? And it all depends, in my view, a lot on the size of the company. What I would like to see is that we stop publishing European directives that impose very stringent rules on all companies. There are basically a few types of companies. First of all, we have the companies that are trying to make a living out of protecting data. They see it as an opportunity. The second type of company is the company that is aware of the need to protect its data. And the third type of company, and that's the majority, by the way, are the companies that have no idea, that doesn't have the legal support to know what is driven by Europe and what is actually the local legislation. Think of small companies. Say you have a 10-person company. You simply don't have the bandwidth. You're focused on your business. You're not focused on protecting the data. On top of that, you may be in a position that you are not aware of the type of data you have. You may not realize how sensitive it is and how valuable it may be to others. So now I know that a lot of companies are worried about the privacy of their employees, and they know that you shouldn't be reading their emails just like that. Well, quite frankly, if you look at small enterprises, it's not uncommon for people to exchange their passwords on a number of areas.
Sure.
Because it's simply, if you're three, people simply do that with all the possible consequences that entails. So there's a huge difference between large companies and very small companies. How we find that balance? Again, my personal email account within Agoria is protected by a password. My assistant can see everything that comes in. My calendar is completely open to everybody in the organization. My mobile phone number is on my business card. You would be surprised to see how many business cards I get from people who still believe that they should not put their mobile number, they would only put their fixed line number here in Belgium. So where's the balance? I don't have the answer because it's a very personal matter. But I believe that cost should be a driver, and I'm sorry, I'm representative of companies. I believe that we should avoid at all time to impose unreasonable cost upon companies because we have a need to protect something. It's just untenable.
Okay, I'm sure that's a subject for a next radio interview that you may give, but I'm intrigued by what you said about segmenting the players or segmenting the data controllers based on the possible use they make of the data, where I see a big difference between the possible use you make of data on the one hand and the risk that exists that the data will be compromised and that actually affects the interest not only of the company but also of the individuals whose data are captured in the system. So the question is, how much should the dimension of the data controller play a role in their obligations to secure the data rather than the interests of the persons whose data are captured in the systems. And that brings me to Tomas, who spoke about, I think, the societal contract, right? You said something about societal agreement and the need to have clarity. Personally, I think that the data protection rules, we have data protection legislation, are part of the contract. I mean, laws are an instrument to make contract with society. Do you think that we have not enough clarity today? Is there a problem with the way the rules are applied or not applied? Because they contain, for example, strict obligations to have state-of-the-art security systems in place.
I completely agree with you with the point that, in fact, the laws are there for that. The legal framework, whatever it is, it's the reflection of what we consider as a society that is important for us. There might be a good legal framework, there could be a bad legal framework, but doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. The fact is that the legal framework, that is the societal contract that we all have to respect. On the other hand, as I mentioned before, the question of defining what is your personal sphere, what is the kind of data that you want to share, you are willing to share, it's a very personal question. So it's very difficult to make a law that actually fits the needs or the concerns of all the society. It's extremely difficult. So in my view, at least, the legal framework, whatever it is, will always create discontent.
Sure.
Always. But then we have to respect it.
I think, Tomas, you also made the point. There's one thing about having a user or giving the user a choice between what is happening with his or her data and then allowing for unwanted use of that data. If we talk about me giving my data to my telecom operator, I think it's quite normal that the telecom operator uses it for the purposes of the relationship we have. If the telecom operator wants to do more with my data, I should be able to know about this, maybe consent, and my expectations should be managed by the telecom operator. However, if there's a hacking into the system of the telecom operator, that has nothing to do with the contract I have with him. It's something that happens, but I have an expectation that my data are being managed in a secure way. Definitely. And that security evolves with the ongoing evolution of technology. So my question is more technology the answer? You said it's a cat and mouse game.
It depends. Let's say that in the cases that let's suppose, for example, that you provide your personal data to any kind of provider of services, and that provider of service, of course, according even to the current legal framework, he's responsible for maintaining that data secure. Of course, if he loses his data, he's going to lose part of his business knowledge. He's going to lose part of the business of all this data that he has collected for his business purposes, and he is entitled to do so. But the moment that he loses it or is disclosed it somewhere else, he's not only losing that business knowledge, he's also violating the contract that he has with the person that actually gave his data. But we never see things coming back. They are, by law, they have to notify data breaches, and they are going to be pursued by data protection authorities. But of course, it depends on the will of the data protection authority to actually execute that or not. But as a person, I would never see anything of that coming back unless I take action. And that has happened a lot, for example, in the United States, law-closed actions by individuals that actually they group together and they launch lawsuits whenever the appropriate authorities they don't seem to take action. And we have a similar case with Facebook in Europe, for example, where there was a law-closed action by European citizens towards Facebook because of the new terms of use agreement.
Right.
So it is complex. The legal mechanisms are there, but they have to be enforced. And we have to, as individuals, to know how it works to be able to defend ourselves, our own rights.
Thank you. You said enforcement, which brings me to Jan, and I saw, Jan, you made some notes. I will allow you to comment on what we said, but I do have another question for you, which is, in the fight, I would see it as a fight between the bad guys, as you described them, and law enforcement agencies. Who's winning it? I mean, is there a fair fight? I mean, will it ever be a fair fight? Because we refer to persons of interest, but Marc said it's maybe closer than we think, but it may still be a little bit further away. And although we now know that you have Siena and things like that, I mean, is it a fair fight?
Well, that's a good question. The answer would be, I think it can never be about winning the fight. So if that would be our aim, we would have lost already. It's the same like any promises about 100% of security are by default nonsense to my mind. So what we need, and there's the link to the notes I've made and to the discussion we've had here, what we need, however, is a legal framework which is tailored towards the situation and the threat we are facing today. And in that regard, I have some doubt whether what we currently have is suitable to tackle crime in the way we would need to do that. And I can provide you with extreme examples of that. So as some of you may know, the Europol legal framework is currently under review in Brussels. So there are ongoing negotiations, a trialogue on the new Europol regulation, and public-private partnership as well as open sources intelligence are at the core of the discussion. If we look at the current legal framework, we have a provision which allows us to directly receive information, including personal data from publicly available sources. So far, so good, makes perfect sense. The issue is that this provision only talks about directly receiving data. So there's no provision in our legal framework which would be about dissemination, further dissemination of such data. So that may result, or that's a real case now. I got, not too long ago, I got a phone call from the Finnish Europol National Unit, and they said, we have come here across a public Facebook page, and on that public Facebook page, there was credit card details. So an invitation, basically, to exploit that in order to withdraw money in an illegal fashion. And the question which was put forward to my office was, is Europol, we hereby provide you that data. You are the European Cybercrime Center. Can you please forward that data to Facebook? So, and you might, your guess would probably be, yes, of course. The European Cybercrime Center must be in a position to inform Facebook about the fact that certain data which is public should be removed. The legal answer, if you strictly apply our legal framework, is no. Because when it comes to publicly available information, the only privilege we have is that we may directly receive it. But as Europol, we have no legal basis to provide personal data to a private party, even if it's already publicly available. So these are scenarios. So my answer was, dear Finnish colleagues, I'm very sorry, we cannot do it. Can you please go ahead? And the same evening, I could have gone home as Jan Ellermann, not as a Europol official, and could have informed Facebook. Does this make sense? I doubt it. Yeah? So these are extreme examples, but the core message is privacy is very important, it's very valuable, and in the aftermath of the Snowden revelations, there's also a lot of focus on that, rightfully so. But still, we need to have a discussion which also allows us to do our job. I think that's the bottom line for me.
Okay, okay. Let me just quickly scan the audience to see if there's any interest for questions at this stage. And if not, I would like to conclude on this panel, also looking at my watch and appreciating the audience staying with us for an extra few moments, but not without profusely thanking our three panelists, Marc, Tomas, and Jan, for their wonderful contributions. I think we will have a hard time to decide which of these entities or organizations we want to join and have a second career or a third career with. But they were thrilling testimonials they provided us with, and I think we better understand how big data and cybercrime interact, cross-leverage, and intersect. Thank you very much, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for staying till the end. So I'm not going to try to summarize everything we heard in the past 2 days, because I try to stick within my time limit. I want to first speak again about Snowden. I know the name has been mentioned a lot of times, and I guess you all now know about the NSA. So, for a moment, I hope even be able to forward these slides to the next one. Let me try one more time. But I guess the nice thing about Snowden is that you now know all what the NSA is. I'm a cryptographer, so I've actually been with the NSA in conferences since the late 80s. They came with long raincoats to our conferences, and they try to spy on what we do. They never actually give us information, but they always try to get information from us. And you may know that the NSA has a dual role. One role is to actually protect government communications, and the other one is to spy on all of us. So, and what we've learned, actually, I think, in the past relation, the past 2 years, is that they've been much more doing spying than actually defending. And so, something I think countries should learn is that if you have an organization that has to do both things, there's an inherent conflict of interest. And if you look at offense versus defense, they will always favor actually offense over defense, because in some sense, in the cyber world, offense is easier. So the NSA's motto is collect it all, know it all, exploit it all. So maybe the NSA are the first ones to actually have big data, and we're just copying them. So what they do is not so surprising in the sense that if you look at open sources, if you look at their budgets, you could quite figure out what they were doing. You could look at how much information they would collect, that they would use data mining and clever technologies is not so surprising. But still, I think the scale and impact of what they do is actually quite surprising. They're extremely sophisticated, both organizational and technical. So they're very well organized and also very well networked. To give you an example of this, the NSA had 3 independent ways of getting at Google's data. So even if one became illegal or Google would add one protection, they had 2 more left. This is good design in security. We should learn from this. Of course, they made some mistakes because apparently their document security was not as good as their way of attacking again. It's not only the NSA, it's not only the US, it's not only the UK, it's not only the 5 Eyes. The 5 Eyes is US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. In fact, many more countries were involved, and I believe also Belgium was to some extent involved. What was perhaps more surprising was that industry was also involved. There was a lot of collaboration, and one of the first revelations was PRISM, and more or less, they got data from the industry. Sometimes voluntarily. Apparently, the telco industry in the US collaborated voluntarily, but other companies may have received security letters. What is a security letter? You get a letter from the government to give up all your data, more or less, and you're not allowed to talk about it. So this is why some smaller companies have decided to just shut themselves down rather than comply with the letter. So this is how we know these things exist. But of course, a company like Google or Microsoft will not shut down because of the letter, they will just collaborate. Okay. The NSA has also undermined cryptographic standards. So they've actually undermined the reputation of the National Institute for Standards and Technologies. And they've actually decided to compromise them by letting them standardize algorithms with backdoors in them. So deliberately undermine the reputation of NIST. So if, in fact, in a standardization body, if I'm talking to NSA people, in fact, I'm talking to people who try to stop the difficult job of getting good standards. But perhaps what's the more interesting and surprising, and we've heard it here as well, is the best defense is active defense. So I naively thought that the NSA was just spying. But in summary, the NSA is not just spying, they're actually hacking. They actually control the internet, and they control our devices using malware and sophisticated techniques. For example, if you get an update based on the country where you are or the company where you are, you may get a different version with a special backdoor for the NSA. An important technique is quantum insertion. If you enter in your browser facebook.com, if the NSA wants it, they can answer before Facebook. There is no trickery involved here, they're just faster. They control the internet in such a way that they can answer before Facebook, and from then on, they take over your machine. So more or less what they've done in this way, by writing malware, exploiting 0 days, buying 0 days, and compromising network, they made actually the cybersecurity problem way harder. The problem without them was quite hard, but with them, I think it's almost mission impossible. Interesting thing from Snowden revelation is that it's, of course, no longer deniable. And we also know that the oversight has been very weak. In the US, there is the FISA courts for limited protection. In the UK, oversight has been very weak. There is very little evidence that there is actually strong oversight on the NSA. But more or less, if you're using the internet, you're talking to the NSA. That's the message which you have to take. Yes, I'll try to fix this, but I don't know how to do this. Let me try one more time to push the magic buttons. Oh, maybe it's going to work in the end. Anyway, oh, this is great, fantastic. No, I don't have a screen, but at least we can keep going forward. So there are very sophisticated systems. X-Keyscore is one of them, and I don't want to go into technical details, but they bring everything together just like Europol. They don't have silos. They actually bring everything together. There is also data on which regions are more surveilled, and you may be happy as a Belgian, at least in Belgium, surveillance level seems to be quite low, at least the ones announced. Here is data from Germany, which I think is pretty interesting. It shows that the NSA gets data items from the general German telcos, and there is what the NSA calls DNI and DNR. DNI is the data, and DNR is dial number recognition. This is the phone numbers, this is the metadata, who you call, which websites you visit, and so on. And there was quite a debate about metadata. So Obama said, it doesn't matter, it's only metadata. But then, a bit later, General Hayden said, we kill people based on metadata. And then he realized there may have been a kind of misalignment between those two. Then he said quickly afterwards, it's not the same kind of metadata. But so metadata is very important, and today it's very difficult to protect it. Okay? So a final, more technical slide is about what we learned about analytics. So what we thought was surveillance was you enter keywords like Al-Qaeda or Raqqa or ISIS or the phone number of a potential terrorist, and you get all the phone calls or all the web visits or whatever, everything related to this stuff. So now what we've actually learned is that, I think it's better with the animations, we'll show better, that they have a much better system called Tempora, and the Tempora system does the same thing as Google. I'm not going to explain it here, but essentially it's like Google. If you enter something in Google, you have an answer in seconds. And so the NSA and GCHQ, they store the internet traffic for several days, which cost them a couple of $100 million, and they do the same analytics as Google does. And in fact, what they do is, based on this analytics, they find new keywords. So this may sound all very techy, but I'll give you some simple examples of questions the NSA can answer, because actually the NSA says, it's not so important, we store all your data, but we don't look at it. But for example, questions NSA can answer is, once you give them one phone number, they can find everybody who talked to this person, they can find out where you have been and which websites you'd visited. So you can imagine that when something happens in Paris, and they find one identity card or one phone number, immediately this number went to the NSA, because they're the only ones, together with the Brits, who can actually give the phone numbers of all the friends, the other devices, the smartphones these guys had, the laptops, and everything comes out of this fantastic Tempora system. Okay? If they want to hack a country, they can find all Microsoft Excel sheets with MAC addresses. And then they will find them, and this is how they can map the architecture of all networks in a country or in a company. They can find all exploitable machines in a country, because if a Microsoft update fails on your device, NSA will know about it. So they also know that actually your device has not been patched and is vulnerable. And finally, say if they want to go after paranoid people or careful people, they could say, give me everybody in a country who speaks German and uses a black phone or uses PGP or GPG. So while they try to sell you is that we only look at the dangerous things, in fact, if you look at the kind of queries they can answer, those queries are extremely intrusive. So what have we learned? Never underestimate a well-funded and motivated opponent. The NSA can do much more than actually what we thought it could do. What we thought was passive surveillance is actually active hacking. They don't just listen, they control our networks, they control our systems in many ways. And if your device gets an automatic update, it's controlled by the company with the update. And eventually, if this country happens to be based in the US, this update can be controlled by the US. This is the world in which we live. The other thing is that intelligence agencies tend to focus on ComSec, communication security, but the real game is in CompuSec, is on the end devices, the hacking of the iPhones, the smartphones, the laptops, and the servers. As I mentioned, it's not only the Five Eyes. Every nation is involved. And of course, if they're not involved yet, what happened in all those nations is that the head of intelligence went to see the president, or vice versa, and what did they say? I want this too. I also want a box where I can ask these questions. Who in my country has those kinds of opinions? Who in my country uses encryption? How can I hack networks in my country? So other nations want the same capabilities, and organized crime also wants to go the same way. Okay? So I think it will become much more interesting in the next years, because everybody has been reading those documents carefully. Maybe not in Belgium, because we don't have enough expertise and money, but I can tell you in many countries, people have carefully been studying all these documents and trying to build the same capabilities. Okay. To give you an example, there was Merkel's phone. It was revealed that at least 5 nations could listen to Merkel's phone. I don't care very much about Merkel's phone, and she had actually a secure one which she refused to use. But this shows you where we're at, and probably in 5 years, there will be 15 nations listening to Merkel's phone. What do small countries do? Well, there is economy of scale. In a country like the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, you can't develop this. You don't even have enough space to put all the data centers. So what do? You have a secret treaty, you give your data to them, and you get some information in exchange. This is, I think, I don't have hard evidence for this, but all indications show in this direction. This is also why you will never hear government people say much about Snowden and what happened. The parliament members will speak, but the government ministers will not speak about it because of this. If they actually upset the NSA, the treaty will be broken and they'll no longer get the intelligence in exchange. And of course, we as citizens, we have no democratic involvement in those processes. So what can we do in this new world? Well, of course, we need a policy, and the good thing is that Europe has forced all the countries to have a cybersecurity policy. We need to work on awareness and education. We need to do sharing and collaboration, of course. You heard about all these things in the past days. And hopefully also some R&D for better technologies. A big problem is trust. And many people say, trust us, you can trust us, we're a trusted company, we have a trusted exchange. But who can we still trust? Europe is working on a Network Information Security Directive, where you will have to report your incidents. And every nation will have a center where those things are recorded. Any idea which center will do this for the UK? I bet it will be GCHQ. So in fact, if you report a problem or vulnerability or incident in your country, within a few hours it will be at the NSA, who will start hacking your company based on it. That's the reality today. We have no trust anymore between nations, and this means that actually defending ourselves has become way harder. In Belgium, we've been working very hard. The BC Center has organized this conference, and there was also a new initiative you may have heard of, the Cybersecurity Coalition, where we try to bring together all the key stakeholders, the government, the industry, and academia, to try to work on all those items. Item is first on looking at awareness and sharing. So it's actually a very complex picture we are fighting, and this conference was mostly actually about cybercrime. And this is, I would say, in my diagram, the lower stuff. You have the easy things, or the lightweight things, still unpleasant, but cyberbullying, malware, ransomware. Then moves up to organized crime, industrial espionage, government espionage, and then Bruce spoke about this, about cyber war. And then there is also terrorism, which is somewhere halfway, because it's not massive scale necessarily, but the impact can also be very large. So what has been happening is that the people in charge of government espionage, the NSA actually, they've been overreaching. They've no longer been listening, they've been hacking everything. They've been preparing war. This is clear. It's not only defense, it's also offense. But they've also been doing industrial espionage. And of course, this has a major impact on the picture, because if you only focus on crime on the lower left, you actually don't understand what's happening. And I think the big problem is how will we resolve the crime problems if we don't solve the other problems? And the privacy issue is dealing mostly with the crime side, I would say, but there is never legislation about, for example, intelligence agencies, what they can do. There is no legislation to your order. In other words, the privacy legislation doesn't speak about that. It doesn't tell you how much your data is protected against them. So I'm a techie, so I want to say what we can do with technology to improve the situation. Well, for communication security, there is very good news. There is strong encryption. And so you can actually protect your communications. The problem is the standards are very complex, and few of us actually have secure encryption. There is many vulnerabilities, and only a very small part of our communications are protected. And this is to the great benefit of NSA and their friends. Here you see an example of something, a document leaked last Christmas in the Spiegel. So apparently there is some technologies like OTR, that's a kind of app tool of the record communication. And so if it appears in NSA transcripts, they say we can't decrypt this. So there's some good news, I would say. So there is some tools that they actually cannot break. So things like TrueCrypt, PGP, and Tor are there. They have strong algorithms. They're open source. They're end-to-end secure from your device to the other party without interruptions. And unfortunately, most of them have a limited user base. Because if something has a large user base, like Skype, and it's bought by a large company, I'm not going to give you names, and they take out the security so that the NSA can listen in. So if you thought Skype was secure, forget about it. In fact, today, it's very hard for you to have secure communications. In that sense, government has succeeded, or the NSA has succeeded. So there has been a major effort, and I don't have time to go into the details, but more or less, the government agencies have been fighting encryption with tooth and nail. They've been undermining standards. They've been trying to make it hard to do research. They've been breaking stuff, using all their resources to break stuff. They put export or import laws. They put backdoors in, and they store encrypted data so that they can actually maybe decrypt it later. So we thought the crypto wars were won because we had the same battle about in the beginning of the 90s. Clinton tried to give us encryption devices with a government backdoor, and we explained as a community that this would be a really big mistake because this backdoor would be abused. And we have seen examples since. GSM has a huge backdoor. And you can ask the Greek government how much they like this backdoor. So there was an incident about 10 years ago in which who is who in Greece, all ministers, the mayor of Athens, all generals and so on, their GSM traffic was eavesdropped through a backdoor in a switch. So this is what's happening with backdoors. They will be abused by others. But so I thought that after the Snowden revelations, people would actually defend stronger crypto and say we need to protect ourselves better. So it was really to our surprise that a couple of weeks ago, Cameron said we should actually forbid encryption. This is going back in time, and I think it's extremely stupid. And unfortunately, also our Minister of Justice has the same opinion. I think our society today could not work anymore without encryption. Not to protect your communication, but to protect your upgrades. So today, there is about 30 billion crypto devices out there. Very few of them protect your communications secrecy, but they do protect the integrity of your systems against most attackers, except against the NSA and GCHQ. So today, we can't actually live without encryption, and given the threat environment, we should actually have more encryption. A question I want to ask as a naive academic, how can it be that it's still legal to offer unencrypted communication services? You can't sell a car without seatbelts. There is security rules for many things, but you can actually still offer unencrypted communication services. Well, how can this be legal? About the end systems, well, everybody moves their data now to the cloud because it's cheaper and it's more convenient and more robust and more flexible. So, but it's sensitive data, so surely you encrypt this, right? Well, most data in the cloud is still not encrypted, in spite of all the Snowden stories. And very often, if it's encrypted, the key sits also somewhere in the cloud. So more or less, even if you have encryption, the US government can still get the key and the data with a simple security letter, and you still don't hear about this. So it is actually quite complex, and Bruce touched also on the territoriality issues. Even if Microsoft's data is in Ireland, and the data is from a European citizen, does a US judge have access to this data? Another very interesting problem is, if you would encrypt your data, can you still compute on it? And this is something cryptographers like me work on, so that you can actually keep your data in the cloud encrypted, and you can still do some simple computations on it. So you could compute whether somebody is healthy or not, or you could compute averages or variances without actually leaking the data. So this is something which is coming. We can't do everything. We can't make something as fast and convenient as Google, but many things we can do on encrypted data. It's really amazing. But the real question is, do we really need big data? And this seems to be a question which is not asked. So what's happened is, because of cost reasons, and because the advertising model we have for revenue, so you may know that Google and Facebook, they make on each of us who uses their services about $5 to $10 per year. And this is how they end up with a billion of users and 50 billion revenue. This is all from advertising. And this advertisement is possible because they have data about you, because they profile you and they can target the advertisement. But of course, this decision to store all data in the servers of big companies is a decision. And architecture is politics. We also give away our power. In fact, in this case, we know what's happening. This data ends up in the hands of the NSA, actually, and GCHQ. So we should, I think, really think very carefully before we actually centralize data, because it means we give up the control over it. And for many applications, you could actually do the same thing with the data where the data stays on your device. If you want to find out how good you've been running, there is no need to tell Garmin what you've been doing today. Garmin could give you a tool to measure your performance on your smartphone, and your data stays with you. And if you want to get advertisement, your smartphone could say, this guy may want to buy new shoes, and you could agree to get advertisement for shoes, but they don't need your data for this. There are exceptions where you have to put data centrally to do analysis comparative among many users, but then you could actually do it encrypted and do some calculation on the encrypted data. But so we as Europeans naively have put all our data in the US clouds, more or less, and now we're actually surprised that they abuse it, also for espionage, industrial espionage against us. But in fact, our privacy laws don't really apply there by some magic reason. So but the message is, we could actually do it differently. And it is quite difficult economically, because you have to change a business model of companies with 50 billion or 100 billion turnover, but that doesn't mean there is no alternative. But of course, if you want an alternative, you need a policy. It will not happen by itself. Okay. So it's time to wrap up. So from a technology point of view, what we should do is rethink our architectures. Is it really necessary to put all our data in central clouds? How much can we do locally? Or you can also have a private cloud in your company, or you keep the data in the user's device. These devices are now powerful enough. This smartphone is more powerful than a mainframe computer from the early 80s. So why can't the data stay in here? With a private backup, why should it go to somewhere where I don't have control over it? We should worry more about those devices. The countries that control those devices actually control our future, our economic future. And by the way, people think that this is US or Asian smartphone, but in fact, still several ICs in there are European. So we still contribute something, but we don't have the control over this stuff. Okay? So we should think how we can protect against very powerful opponents. And you can say, I don't care about the NSA. Well, in a few years, organized crime will have comparable capabilities. And if you don't start preparing for it today, you will be very vulnerable to it in the next years. I think also the long-term solution to all these problems is open technologies. Open source, so we can review it for backdoors. We're all responsible together to review it. And I know that Heartbleed was open source, but that doesn't mean anything. We could invest more in checking the security. There is no reason why we shouldn't do this. I think open source and open review are the future to create our independence in technology. For policies, I really think that the big data and the mass surveillance, this combination, it threatens our autonomy, it threatens our democracy, it threatens human rights. It may be interesting for you to know that the US Constitution and the US lawyers and legal system, does not believe that any human rights should be accorded to a non-US citizen, or non-US person, in fact. So the only time I have US rights for the US government is when I move to the US and I'm there on a trip, then I actually have human rights. But as soon as I leave the country, or if you don't have, and without a US passport, you actually have no human rights. This is very, at least no human rights in the sense of protection of the Fourth Amendment, protection against unreasonable search and seizure. It's a very interesting legal interpretation. Some other countries have this interpretation, which is the UK and Israel. I also don't think that privacy is an individual decision. Privacy is a collective good. Information which you want to give away may actually compromise my good, and many values in our society are there because we can have a private conversation, we can have political action, and discuss things in private, not hindered by any government, not monitored by any government, not hindered by any third party. It seems that we should not give up so quickly, because of technology, the right for a private conversation. And I think the argument that I have nothing to hide is very interesting, but I think it's wrong, because even those people will not tell you everything. If you ask them medical data, they will probably not give it to you. If they ask your financial data, they will not give it to you. And maybe if they give theirs, they will not give it for their family members. So we all have things to hide, and it's legitimate. This is part of being human. And in some sense, I think the best way of thinking about this is pollution. In the 70s, pollution was okay. You could do it. It was a collective good. There was enough air, there was enough land, you could pollute everything. There were no rules for it. And the company says, well, don't make rules, especially not for small companies, because pollution will kill business. I mean, if you forbid pollution, or if you make it difficult, it will actually kill business. But now what we see is that actually we ruined our environment to some extent, and we actually have to take collective action, and we understand it's a collective good. And so I think if we believe it's our individual decision which information we can share, I think we're actually wrong. It should be a collective decision, because it's a collective good. So we should understand that pervasive surveillance means active attacks, and so we should think about this. So more or less, we have a very hard problem, how to protect a very complex infrastructure. And now somebody is making it even harder. They're undermining it in many ways. So I think a healthy reaction as a nation or as a continent would be to actually start building our own systems and create autonomy. I'm not very much anti-US, but if you go to Asia, the Koreans have their own infrastructure, the Japanese have their own infrastructure, the Chinese, the Russians, all larger nations have understood that if you want to be independent and economically viable, you actually have to protect yourself and build your own IT systems. My friend George Genesis calls the current situation we have cyber colonialism. It's more or less colonialism is what we had in the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. And I think we've now created a similar situation where we're dependent on somebody else through technology. And it's not so hard to actually gain independence. It just requires the investment in the right technologies. Okay, so what we need is an industrial policy where we develop our own systems, can be very good for business, can create new models, but it will be different and more independent. Of course, some other things will not be dealt by technology. It's clear also, if you heard Bruce yesterday, we'll need some non-proliferation treaties to stop certain attacks, just like when biochemical weapons and nuclear weapons were discovered. Cyber weapons can be so powerful that we'll have to forbid using them. And those people who still use them, or those nations, put them out of the law, because there is no way we can actually deal with them. We can't defend ourselves against those. And then finally, we have to think, and this is very difficult, because we want to deny mass surveillance. We want to allow targeted surveillance. So can we do this? This is a very difficult technical problem. And definitely the way we're going now is mass surveillance, and targeted surveillance is kind of a byproduct, but we have to redesign systems so we have actually targeted surveillance and also surveillance for law enforcement. Because what you now see is that this element is brought into the debate in either NSA uses law enforcement, uses the FBI to get certain things. Who was complaining about encryption in the iPhone? It was the FBI. But in fact, of course, the NSA is also bothered by it. But I think the law enforcement community should distance itself from the intelligence community and should use their own arguments and should argue for targeted surveillance. I was very pleased with the Europol story about how careful you are with the data and how much you try to limit it. I mean, 80,000, this is almost nothing, right, compared to what NSA does. So I think this is the message. We can build a system with targeted surveillance, and with verification, and we should actually resist mass surveillance. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.